one of the things that we would say is we create safety by engaging the topic as a family from the very beginning.
Exactly.
That we cast this vision of what we believe sexuality is supposed to be, so that when they are exposed to pornography, they're, they can recognize this is in opposition of what we desire or what we believe it was intended. And then another thing is this idea we create safety by providing guidelines. Like we said, we expect you to come across this. So we're not surprised when you do. We have a plan in place. We have our fire drill. And so therefore, we're going to implement the fire drill, and you don't have to figure this out all by
So,
yourself. It's almost as if we create a fire alarm that all they have to do is flip the switch, and the rest of us know what to do to respond to create safety.
exactly.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. We're happy to have with us today one of our valued team members here at Faithful and True, Elizabeth Griffin. How are you today, Elizabeth?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us again today. Greg came up with a wonderful idea for a series of podcasts that we're going to be doing that are based around the principles of safety. And today you're going to share some of your insights regarding creating safety in our homes regarding pornography. And Greg, I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, well, thanks. Well, and Elizabeth, thanks for being here. And I know that this is something that you have a lot of interest in and passion and expertise in helping people to understand the role of the internet in the home, and even how to create some safety for our families around pornography, and to take something like technology that could be destructive and to keep it safe for everybody involved. So thanks for being with
Thank
us.
you. Yes, I'm excited to talk about this.
Well, let's just start with what first got you interested in considering what it meant to be safe in the home around pornography, and this became something that was important to you.
I think it's because I begin to see a lot of children and adolescents who their first exposure to pornography was an accidental exposure in the home. That either they lived with a parent who struggled with online pornography use and the child walked in and saw it on the screen, or the parent just, like many of us who've raised children, just didn't think about we need to talk to our kids about this issue. And so a child was maybe Googling something for a homework assignment and ended up at a porn site and didn't know how to handle that because the family had never talked about it. And I know that certainly, was true in my family, that I thought about talking to kids about drugs and alcohol, or being safe in the community, but it had never really occurred to me to talk to my children about digital safety and
Hmm.
what they need to do if they came across pornography accidentally.
Kind of the image that I was first introduced to is it's most of us would never send our kids into the big city without a long list of instructions and directions and things to do in order to be safe, and what happens if there's an emergency. And yet, the imagery of the internet, it's like sending them into this jungle, this huge city there where there are tons of amazing and good things, and there's a lot of dangers, and not setting our kids up to be successful when they come across some of that complexity. So
Yes.
that idea of supporting our kids and giving them some guidance, I think, is so important.
Yes, definitely. And I work with families all the time about what can you do and where do you start? I think lots of times we wait to children get to junior high and then we start talking to them about how to be safe online. Well, that isn't the
Right.
time that they listen at their very
Yeah.
best.
What did
So,
you want to know, Mom?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I always talk about, when we take a 2-year-old to the playground, and they say something rude to someone just because they're being brutally honest, or they hit another child and take away their toy, we immediately start teaching them rules of how to act in public. We don't say, mean things to people. We don't hit people and take away their toys. And so that's equally important to start at a really young age, because children are now having screen time when they're toddlers, to say, we never say mean things to people online. We never show our body to other people online. Very simple things that even a 4, 5, 6 year old can understand, and start to establish those rules when they're young, so that children start to learn that there are rules in this online world.
Mhm.
Because I think
Yeah.
for many kids, they get to junior high and think, well, there must not be any rules here, so I can just do anything I want to do.
Well, and one of the things that is true is typically our children are ahead of us in understanding technology.
Yes.
Whatever the newest technology is, typically it is the young adults, the adolescents that are first exposed to it and have the best understanding.
There,
And so
I was
one of the things for a lot of parents is they are just behind the curve when it comes to what is available or what technology can do.
there, our children, anyone born after 1993 is a digital native, and
Mm,
anyone born before 1993 is a digital immigrant. And
Mm.
so, for those of us, who are parents, who are past the age of 29, really, um, we really are at a disadvantage, because our brain does not process technological information like someone born after 1993 does.
mhm. One of the things I want to just reemphasize, you said it earlier, that most of the men who come to our workshop, their first exposure to something sexual, pornography, whatever it might have been, they stumbled across it. They weren't looking for it. They didn't even know it existed, but they came across it in the street. They came across it in a field. They came across a parent's stash. And for a lot of boys that you were saying born after 94 that we work with, their first exposure was either finding it on the computer because they understood
Right.
about computer history before their parents did, or like you said, they were at the Lego site, or they were wanting to do their report on Lincoln, and just a couple of clicks, immediately they're in this chaos. And it is that shock and that naivete. It's not that they were exposed to something, it was that they were alone and didn't know how to navigate it. That's what creates so much of the
And
chaos.
also that they felt like they couldn't tell anyone about it. And I
Mm,
think
Mhm.
that is one of the biggest points that we talk about with parents, is you need to be able to have that open communication, to say to your child, it is okay if you find something online that makes you uncomfortable. I want to talk to you about it. And,
mm.
you can tell me anything. And I know it might be uncomfortable, but it's really important that in our family, we talk honestly about these things. And so I think
Right.
communication, and again, starting that communication early, making sexuality a topic that you're talking about in in the offline world, so that children feel like they can come to their parents when they run across something in the online world.
Right. Well, and maybe we even change our language to we expect you to come across something on the internet
Mhm.
that will make you
I was
uncomfortable.
going to say
Um,
that, and then I was like, well, maybe that's too much for parents to hear right now, because that is what I often
I think that that
the
is the reality
reality.
that we live
Yes,
in.
that
Yeah.
is
Yes.
the reality, that the age of first exposure to pornography online is 9 years old. And I work with so many parents who say, my child is not going, I will make sure my child not finds pornography. Well, unless you expect to glue that child to you 24
Hmm.
7, eventually they will find pornography. And there's a lot of research about alcoholism, that if you can delay the time a child takes their first drink, if a child starts drinking at 12, that's usually a lot more problematic than if they start at 18. And in some ways, I look at pornography the same way. Kids are going to be exposed to pornography online, but can we do interventions to protect that as long as we possibly can so that they have a more mature brain to know how to process that information and an understanding that they need to find someone to talk to about it.
Right. Well, and maybe one of the ways to even understand intervention is that when we can be with our children as they are navigating the complexity of sexuality online, that is a form of intervention because we are speaking a different truth to the chaos that the online exposure created. Years ago, I was at a workshop on abuse, and the speaker was saying that when we look at the impact of abuse, we look at three things: the intensity, the duration, the frequency. And she went on to say, but the thing that we see is most significant is how long it remains a secret. The
Mhm.
longer the child is not talking about the experience, the more it formulates a perspective through which the child views their world and the world in general. And so I think the same thing is true about this issue. It's not that they're exposed to pornography, it's how long do they go without getting help and support to
Yes,
know how to navigate it. And the longer it remains a secret, the more
it
chaos it
becomes.
creates.
There's a great little book. It's fairly old now, but I think it's still a good book. It's called "What's the Big Deal About Pornography," and it is written from a Christian point of view. It's by Jill Manning, who is part of the Mormon Church in Utah. But she wrote a great book just to talk to middle schoolers and high schools about understanding why is this a big deal? Why
Mhm.
are we concerned? And I've even had parents say to me, well, I was exposed to a Playboy magazine when I was in junior high and I turned out okay. The thing is that a lot of parents don't understand that what children are seeing online is not our generation's view of pornography,
Yeah.
that it is much more explicit and graphic and much more for children to try to process with the adolescent or child brain than anything that a lot of people were exposed to in the offline world.
Yeah, one of the things that we talk about when men come to our workshop is we ask two questions. The first is, how old were you when you were first exposed to pornography? Because, like you've said, that age is really important. And then the second thing is, how explicit was the material? And that's part of the chaos that the internet creates. Is it's not that you were just exposed to pornography, but in just a couple of clicks, you can be exposed to the most
Extreme.
explicit pornography that is
Yeah.
available and
Right.
extreme, significantly chaotic for a child. And so part of it is understanding the significance of the pornography itself and what the child is being exposed to.
Yes.
One of the things that we see is, you know, the child is exposed to something explicit, it creates this shame, chaos reaction in them, and they don't know how to bring that to their parents because the explicitness of it itself is part of what's creating the shame and the chaos. And ironically, the more that they need to talk about it because it was explicit, the less likely they are to talk about it because of their shame.
And also because, we're talking about oftentimes kids discovering pornography when their hormones are kicking in. And so
Yeah.
there may
Right.
also be arousal, which would be a completely normal biological response, but it's very difficult to then go talk to someone, whether it's a parent or a minister or a teacher, about not only am I shameful I did this, but I also felt arousal to this, and there must be
Hmm.
something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so I think it's really important. I raised two boys. So, there are times they said things to me that it took all of my energy to like just calmly say, well, tell me more about that. Because
Right.
if because my internal voice was like wanting to freak out and like, oh my gosh. And so
Right.
I mean, I think it's really important that parents prepare. and have the ability to remain calm on the outside with their children when their children approach them, because the absolutely worst thing you can do is freak out and
Hmm.
start like getting triggered yourself
Mhm.
by maybe
Right.
what they saw or what they looked at, or thinking, they're never going to be responsible young men now because of this
Or
Right.
experience. And so
or
I
a
think
or adding to the shame that they're already experiencing.
exactly. So I think it's really important that as a couple, you talk about what your response is going to be and to be prepared, because the more prepared you can be to talk with your children or to hear what they have found online, the more open they're going to be to coming to talk to you about it.
Yeah. One of the things I believe absolutely is whatever fear or shame I have about sexuality, I will bring that into the conversations that I have with my children, and I will just pass it on.
Mhm.
And so part of the work that parents can do is to go after their own sexual histories and stories and address those issues of shame and fear, so that when it does come up, they are able to be more with their children in a safe way.
Absolutely.
And the stories that I hear, it's interesting. There's one reaction where the child is found looking at pornography or maybe masturbating, and it creates so much chaos for the parents that nothing is ever said about it again. There's no acknowledgement that it even happened, which in itself creates chaos for the child. Or the other extreme would be the parent who reacts in that fear and shame and panics, and the child is shamed for something they already feel shame about. And so that either way, it communicates to the child, this isn't something that my family knows how to process well. So I will just keep it to myself, which we know is the most unhelpful thing that the child can do.
Exactly. I also recommend that parents, again, starting at a young age, create a digital health plan with their child.
Mm.
Like and that's going to change. What you do when your child is 8 years old is going to look much different than when your child is a freshman in high school. But to really sit down and talk just about technology use overall, what's okay in our family, what's not okay in our family, when, what happens if you do come across something that makes you feel uncomfortable, who can you talk to, how will we address that, and also to be good role models. I remember in my family when I did this, the rule is that at 8 o'clock all technology is going to be off in our house. And then a couple of times my children found me up in my office checking email, and, they were like, well, this doesn't seem fair. The rule is, and you're not following it. And they were absolutely right that
Right,
we need to be good role models of our online behavior if we're going to give those values to our children, that this is a world we care about and there are appropriate ways to act in this world. And I think in
right,
families, when there's been inappropriate use of pornography, and someone has struggled with pornography use, it's important to um, provide age appropriate information about their own history, that as the child gets older, that they can, know that maybe a parent has looked at pornography. And I don't think you have to go into great detail about this,
right.
but to really provide information that you have realized how it was harmful in your life, and not a lecture, but a sharing of information about how you now conduct yourself in the online world.
Right. Well, and again, the series that we're talking about is this idea of safety. And so, in that conversation, and I do see this often where um, men who come to our workshop are aware of the fact that their fathers also struggled, and that's why it was never talked about. And now they're coming to our workshop because they struggle and they're wondering, what do I say to my children? The whole idea is this: the more that we are able to talk about it, the more safety we are able to create, because then no one is alone in it.
Mhm.
Our children have support. And you alluded to this earlier, but I just want to emphasize it, that part of this is we work together to create a theology of redemptive sexuality in our family.
Mhm.
We cast a vision of what God's intention for sexuality is. And so we begin when our children are born. We talk about bodies, we talk about penises, we talk about vulvas and vaginas, we talk about arousal. And again, as you said, it's age appropriate. But what we're wanting to do is to create what we want as the vision, so that when we come across something that is outside of that vision, we are kind of responding to that. We know this isn't what is right. We know that this isn't what is intended, and the vision has already been cast.
Right.
The the challenge is if there's no conversation about sexuality and then I'm introduced to pornography, then pornography becomes the vision for what I believe sexuality is supposed to be, which creates all kinds of chaos, because one of the most destructive things that I think pornography does is it miseducates us about what sexuality was intended to
Right.
be.
I mean, I think so many families intuitive feel like if I don't talk about sexuality, then my children will never be exposed to pornography. They will never be sexual. And the research it really is clear that the more we can impart our values and our vision of sexuality to our children starting at a young age, the less likely they are to become sexual at an early age, and the less likely they are to become compulsive with their pornography use. Because
Hmm.
with the stories of the men you work with, so many of the families I see have children that by 12 years old are compulsive with their pornography use.
Right.
And
Well, and one thing I would also add is, and what we know is, it's not just boys.
yes,
We here at Faithful and True, our focus is men who struggle with sexual addiction, because we work out of the model that Mark and Deb Laaser established years ago. And what we also know is that girls are being exposed to pornography at the same rate that boys are, and the impact of it is similar. It is the same. In fact, in research that I did recently, the women who struggle with sexual compulsivity, there's not a significant difference between the men who struggle with sexual compulsivity and the women. And so for, the old model that the women in some way are protected from this or are not interested in this, what we see with the internet and the exposure to pornography, that's not true.
and I think families have to look at what they believe about men and women, because I've seen families like, well, if the son got exposed to pornography, well, it's not a big deal. Boys will be boys. We'll just tell him not to
Hmm.
do that. And if the girl gets exposed to pornography or has been looking at pornography, there's some message that now she is no longer pure or no longer
Hmm.
clean, and there's a level of shame that comes with that that is even greater than the level of shame that some men experience.
So, kind of as we think about this, one of the things that we would say is we create safety by engaging the topic as a family from the very beginning.
Exactly.
That we cast this vision of what we believe sexuality is supposed to be, so that when they are exposed to pornography, they they can recognize this is an opposition of what we desire or what we believe was intended. And then another thing is this idea we create safety by providing guidelines. Like we said, we expect you to come across this. So we're not surprised when you do. We have a plan in place. We have our fire drill. And so therefore, we're going to implement the fire drill, and you don't have to figure this out all by
So
yourself. It's almost as if we create a fire alarm that all they have to do is flip the switch, and the rest of us know what to do to respond to create safety.
exactly. That's such a good analogy to use, that you want to have your plan in place and you want to be prepared before you actually run into the situation.
Greg's
And
the
Hmm.
Greg's the king of analogies, Elizabeth. So yeah, I
yeah.
can always count on him to come up with a good one. As I listen to both of you here and realize the number of husbands and wives, moms and dads watching this, what would you recommend is the starter to that conversation with your kids? How do you start this conversation that they need to have with you regarding pornography in the home?
I think you start with normalizing sexuality. You know, that this is part of who God created us to be. It's a good part. I once heard somebody say it's amazing how little we talk about the issue of sexuality, knowing that it affects everyone.
Mhm.
And so we're just going to start with normalizing sexuality, casting a vision. And we also are going to talk about, the language I hear a lot of times are good images or bad images, good pictures, bad pictures. So even when they are young, we can begin to help them to understand that there are these images out there that will be chaotic and create confusion. And that's what we want to try to avoid.
And I also think, again, just really developmentally looking at the age you're talking. If you have a junior high kid, you can sit down and say, "So I'm wondering if you've ever come across pornography online." I've realized
Hmm.
in our family, we've never really talked about that. And it's going to be an uncomfortable conversation. And that's what I said to my boys. I understand this is an uncomfortable conversation, but it's important that we talk about it. And I also, said to them, you don't have to say much back. I'm not expecting you to
Hmm.
have this deep philosophical, spiritual sexuality conversation, but I do want you to listen. And I think,
Hmm.
as Greg said earlier, being the one to take the lead, to open the door, to take control of the conversation, I think is really helpful for all children, no matter what the age. So they don't feel like they have to do much in return to this, but open their ears and listen.
Oh, that's great.
There's a kind of a stereotype of the talk where we have this
Hmm.
one talk with our kids about a particular issue. And one of the things I think is helpful is to understand this as an ongoing
Conversation,
conversation,
yes.
and not waiting for our kids to initiate it. So, one of the things I would do at the end of a significant conversation, no matter what it was about, I would say, and I'm going to bring this up again. We're going to continue this conversation because then I'm not making them responsible for initiating it because, more than likely they wouldn't be able to do that. But I'm also letting them know, hey, you can expect more about this because it is so important and we need to continue the conversation around it.
I always tell parents having conversations in the car when you're driving your children somewhere is always a good start because they
Hmm.
can't leave and you
They're
can't leave.
trapped. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
are too.
Right. The one other thing I would add is I encourage parents to, like you said, own your uncomfortableness.
Mhm.
Own that this is awkward. Own that this is something that is difficult for you and it's important. So you're going to push through the awkwardness versus trying to imagine or pretend that you're not. And so the more authentic you can be about your own journey, your own struggle, and the importance of this, ultimately, I think that's one of the ways that we create safety because it is authentic.
And it also gives our children this belief that we know what we're talking about to some
Mhm.
degree. And as much as
Hmm.
kids at times in development don't want to think we do, they want to also think we do. They want to think we
Mhm.
know what the boundaries are and we understand the issue to some degree. And that is why I always encourage parents, become educated yourself in terms of looking to resources out there about how to talk to kids. There are a lot of good resources that if you just Google talking to kids about digital safety, that will come up that you can look through to find resources that work for you and your family because some resources are going to feel like they fit your value system and some are not. And so it's important to kind of start educating yourself about how others are talking to children so that you can start to feel comfortable in talking to your own children.
Hmm. One thing I would add is that at Faithful and True, we have a book that
Yes,
Mark wrote on how to talk to your kids about sex, which is a great resource. So for any of the parents that are hearing the podcast that are looking for some resources in this area, that's one of the ones that we would recommend.
absolutely. It is a great book.
Well, Elizabeth, Greg and I want to thank you for joining us today on the Faithful and True podcast. This theme of safety is a powerful one. We'd love to do a second podcast with you. I know that there are some other aspects of safety that we'd love to chat with you about. So for today, thanks a lot for joining us. For our viewers, thank you for watching and listening to our podcast. Your loyalty to the podcast is appreciated greatly by us. If you're a man out there and you're struggling with issues of sexual behavior, we invite you to visit faithfulandtrue.com, where you'll find a lot of resources, a lot of information, as well as information about our Men's Journey workshop, which is a powerful 3-day intensive that we would encourage you to look into. Until we join you again, we thank you, and we hope that this coming week will be a week for you that's filled with many blessings and great vision.